Hi everyone, this is Russ in Ioline Customer Service. Today we're going to do a kiss cut, three-layer kiss cut, using the Ioline 300 cutter and Adobe Illustrator. I'm using Illustrator CS6, but you can use anything back to CS2. So let's go ahead and get started. In Illustrator, we're going to just type out a word here. I'm just going to type out Ioline, and just get your text tool, type something out, and we'll make it bigger so it's easier to see, and move it into the middle of the page, and we'll zoom in on it so we've got a good view of it here to work with it. Okay, so the first thing we really need to do is remove the fill, and that's located right there. Click on the little clear box with the red line through it, and then we're going to give it an outline color. I chose green. It doesn't matter what color you use, although there are certain colors that will work better than others. So in order for us to create a kiss cut in Illustrator, what we need to do is create outlines for the text. So that's under the Type menu, and then go to Path, Offset Path. And this lets us create a contour around the entire word. So we'll just play with the numbers here a little bit, and you can hit the preview button so you can see how big they are. And looks like a 1/4 of an inch is a pretty good size. So now we've got a contour around it. We want to do one more of those, so we need to ungroup. So we ungrouped all the letters. Now I'm going to go in and select each background letter that was just created, holding down Shift and clicking on each one. Then I'm going to go in here and group those. So now we have the outside letters grouped together. And then we'll click on it again. Let's go back to Path, Offset Path. And if you hit Preview, it's already at a 1/4 of an inch. And I think that'll probably be good. So now we have two contours around our original Ioline text. So let's ungroup those. So now we have individual letters that we can click on. So now again, hit Shift and click on each outline letter, and let's group those together. So now we should have 3 groups in here. What we're going to end up doing is we need to weld all of this together. So if you open the Pathfinder window, we'll basically click on the one outline group, and we didn't keep that grouped, so let's go back in and group those together. This is the second layer we made. We'll go Object, Group, and then if you simply click on the weld, and there you go. So now we've got 3 different outlines. Well, all we need to do now is create a different color for each of those outlines. So make sure you're clicked on the line tool there, and we'll just use simple, and we didn't group these inside ones together. So let's hold Shift and click on each one of those, and we'll group those together as well. And go back to your outline and give that outline, say, a red color. So now we have 3 individual colors. So let's zoom out here on the page, and we'll select everything, move it down to the bottom left corner of the page. This is basically your origin down at the bottom left. And we'll go File, Export, and pick a good spot to place the file so you can go find it again. Otherwise it's going to be lost. So we'll give it a name. Make sure DXF is the type of file that you're saving. So we'll give it a name here. Hit Save. And then another window pops up. Now look at the settings in this window. All of these settings have to be the same. AutoCAD version has to be 2000 LT 2000, otherwise it will not work. Export selected art only, outline text, all that stuff is pretty general. Okay, so we've exported our design. Now let's open the 301 software. Now the only trick with the 301 is that we've got to change a couple of settings in the default setup for Illustrator DXF files to open properly. If it opens up and it's really tiny, then we have to go in here and change the import options. The main one to check is that DXF scale factor is 1. If it's not, your design will open up and be really tiny. So we'll load the import file, we'll go into Design Setup, and make sure that all our layers are visible, and then naturally we'll start with our bottom layer for the cut. Alright, so now it's time to set up the machine. So we'll put the blade in first. The blade, of course, just push it in there. Don't use metal or any kind of a surface to push that blade in. Just use your fingers, and then make sure the blade rotates properly with your finger. And then put the cap on, but don't tighten the cap. That's the important part. You want this cap to be on just enough to cut through one layer of twill at a time. So what we'll do is adjust it so that there's just a little bit of blade sticking out of the cap. Okay. Then I'll just put some twill on the machine here, and just make sure this is nice and smooth. Any air bubbles trapped underneath it are going to create a place on the cut that doesn't like to cut through. So make sure that your sheet is free of any debris under it. No air bubbles get under there. I use a burnisher tool to make sure that all the bubbles are out. And then turn the machine on. And what we're going to do first is a test cut on another piece of twill that's sitting on top of this first piece that I put down. And by doing this, we can tell if it's cutting through one layer at a time or if it's going to cut really deep through both. So once the machine is initialized, just pull the tray forward a little bit. And I've got a junk piece of twill here that I'm sticking to the bottom layer. And then move it over to a place to make a nice test cut, and hit the test cut button. And it'll do a little square with a circle and a pie pieces, and it should cut out nicely. So upon trying to weed it the first time, it doesn't look like I've got enough blade sticking out, because it didn't cut all the way through. So we'll adjust the blade a little bit more, and it's just the cap on the blade holder. Then I redo my test cut, and as you can see, it looks pretty good. It's already come out by itself, and each pie piece comes off one at a time without sticking to each other, and you can see the impression of that cut in the background twill. And even by lifting the twill up, you can see that it didn't cut all the way through. So that's a good test cut, and that means we're set. So let's pull the tray out, and we'll go ahead and start and cut our first layer. So get a set origin on the machine, and then in the 301 software, we'll hit Send to Cutter and Send. And this sends the job to the machine. And here we go, we're cutting out our bottom layer. Works pretty quickly. Okay. So once we get that first layer cut, what we're going to do is hit the Start-Stop button to get a red light, pull the tray out, and put on your second piece of twill. Now this is pressure-sensitive twill from Stahl's. It's got this backing on it, you peel it, and it sticks to the previous piece that you put on there. In other situations you might have heat-sensitive material, so you just have to heat press it to that as you go. Alright, now it's important to know that you have to hit the Start-Stop button once you've got your second piece on there. If you hit Set Origin, it'll ruin the design. So back in the 301 software, we just need to switch our layers. So we turn off the bottom layer, and we turn on the middle layer. So this is the second layer that we're going to cut, and it looks a little smaller. And we simply say Send to Cutter. And the machine will cut out that layer on this piece of twill, because we've adjusted our cap on the blade holder, it physically cannot cut through the first layer that we cut. So it quickly cuts out this layer, and then we hit Start Stop, pull the tray out, and we put our third piece of twill. This is another piece of Stahl's pressure sensitive twill. And just set that right on top, make sure it's in the right place, and push it down, make sure there's no air bubbles. Hit Start Stop so that it goes back to its previous end point. We go back into Design Setup in the 301 software, and we turn on the top layer and turn off the middle layer. So only the top layer is selected. And then very simply hit Send to Cutter. And because we had a start point already done on the first layer, each time you hit Start Stop, it will go back to its previous start point and remember where it was in space for every design, for every layer. If you hit Set Origin between those, it ruins the design and you won't be able to get it back. So we've got the top layer cut now, and we'll just simply hit Start Stop and pull the tray out so we can weed everything on there. And as you can see, it's cutting pretty nice. Just weed each layer as you go. Sometimes things can stick to each other, so push them down if you have to. And then we'll do our third layer, or the first one that we cut, and that seems to come off very nicely. And then weed out all your individual holes, things like that, those are easier to pull out before you take it off the tray. And then all we have to do is slowly peel this up off the tray. Now I used a high-tack sheet. It's a little bit more difficult to pull the twill off of a high-tack sheet when it's got a kiss cut like this, so you want to be kind of careful as you pull it off. It might make the other layers not registered with the other layers. I mean, it's kind of difficult sometimes, but medium tack sheets work a little better for this. They don't last as long, but as you can see, we've got a nice kiss cut there, and this would be very easy to create a sew file for and have it sewn down. And so that's what we're going to do next, is create some stitches for this file. So let's start by going back into the 301 software, and we've got our top layer visible here, so we're going to hit the Create Stitches window, and we don't need a placement stitch for the top layer. We don't even need a tack down. We'll just do a satin stitch, leave it with all the default settings for now. Actually, maybe we'll change this to a smaller size because that top layer is a little small. So when you hit OK, you can see that we've got a satin stitch now on our top layer. We have to go back into Design Setup, and we'll turn on Layer 2. Turn off Layer 1, and we'll hit OK. And you'll see that now the satin stitch is on Layer 2. But we want to change that. So we go back into Create Stitches, put on a tack down stitch, and maybe a zigzag for this one. And we'll turn off the satin stitch and hit OK. And there we've got our tack down and zigzag. So now we go back into Design Setup, turn on Layer 3, turn off Layer 2, hit OK, and the same stitch will go on the third layer. So we'll go back into Create Stitches, and we'll put a placement stitch on this bottom one because the bottom one is the only one that needs the placement. And now we have a placement, a tack down, and a zigzag on the bottom layer. So back in Design Setup, we can turn all three layers back on, and you can see, let me zoom in a little, that all three layers have a separate stitch on them. And so this is how you create that multiple stitch kind of a deal with kiss cutting. Now if we go back into Design Setup, we now need to tell it what order to stitch in. And this is your stitch order here. So an easier way to figure this out, or at least to keep it organized is I'll change the names of these layers. The first one is top. We'll do middle for this middle one, and we'll do bottom for the bottom one, just so I know which layers are which. And then if you go over to stitch order, we want the bottom layer to stitch first. So that's going to be a 0. And if you hit tab, it automatically sets it up so that the next layer, middle, is 1 and the top layer is 2. So it's 0, 1, and 2. So we will start with the bottom, it'll go to the middle, and then it'll go to the top, and sew that out. When you hit OK, you can see everything is ready to go. So we're going to save the file, and we'll just use Tajima because it's the most common. And really the only thing you have to worry about is a file name. And it will always copy or save that file to the same place where your PLT file is saved. Go ahead and continue. We're going to overwrite an original one that I made earlier, and hit continue, and now it says that your file is saved. So we can actually look at that file now to see if it's saved all right. If we go back into the home screen, click on the Tajima DST button, and you'll see your Ioline DST there that we just saved. We'll load the file, and it opens up with layer 1. Now there's probably an extra layer here because one of the layers will be a stitch layer. But turn all the layers on, and then if you zoom in on it just slightly, you'll see that each layer has a separate stitch on it. So now the fun part of sewing it down.